It is the early morning of September 4th, 476 CE. The sun rises slowly over the Italian peninsula in a pale wash of gray and gold, casting long drowsy shadows across the hills and vineyards. The air is cool and damp with the scent of wet earth and olive branches. Birds begin their calls in the groves, and a faint mist coils in delicate strands over the fields outside the city of Ravenna. Most people do not know, and will never know, that today will be remembered by future historians as the day the Western Roman Empire came to an end. For the people living through it, this day is not marked by drama or disaster. It is simply another day in a world already growing more uncertain. But before we go further, subscribe, like, and write in the comments where you're watching this from. Let's see who's really paying attention, because this story isn't easy to process. Ravenna, once a proud capital, now feels subdued. The streets are quiet at first light, disturbed only by the clatter of wooden shutters being opened, the low chatter of servants beginning their duties, and the shuffling of soldiers changing shifts at the gates. Merchants begin arranging their goods beneath cloth awnings. The stone walls of the city, long a symbol of Roman strength, are streaked with moss and decay. There are rumors, of course. There always are. Whispers of shortages in the countryside, of taxes growing harsher, of new foreign soldiers, Heruli mostly, stationed nearer to the imperial palace than ever before. But there is no sign of chaos. The slow unraveling of an empire does not come with horns or fire. It comes with a steady thinning of what once held things together. Within the imperial palace, a boy emperor sits in a chamber far too large for him. Romulus Augustulus, no more than 15, drifts through his last morning as emperor with quiet, resigned steps. The cold marble underfoot echoes faintly with each movement of his sandal. The mosaics above him depict victories his people no longer remember. His father, Orestes, the true power behind the throne, has already been captured and executed. And now, the barbarian general Odoacer has demanded Romulus abdicate. Today it will be done without ceremony. Without an army to resist, there will be no battle, only surrender. But outside the palace walls, Romulus is barely a memory. The people of Ravenna seldom speak his name. Their concerns are more immediate. Farmers outside the city worry about the coming harvest. It has been a poor year. Crops wilt in dusty fields. Drought and mismanagement have sapped the land's strength. In a modest villa a few miles beyond the city, a retired centurion named Lucius walks through his struggling olive grove. His back aches as he stoops to examine a branch. He does not know that the emperor will fall today. He only knows that fewer caravans have come by this season, that trade has slowed to a trickle, and that his neighbors' lands are going untended. In the hills to the south, a monastery clings to its quiet purpose. The monks there, wrapped in woolen robes against the chill, move through their morning rituals with practiced calm. They light candles and murmur ancient prayers. Brother Julian, young and nearsighted, begins his work at a desk by the window. He carefully applies gold leaf to the illuminated letters of a psalm, unaware that his small, steady labor is helping preserve a world that is vanishing. The political world beyond their cloistered walls means little to them. Rome to them is not a city, but an idea, a memory, a faith. In the markets of Ravenna, daily life continues with practiced resilience. A woman named Flavia haggles for bread. Her silver coins are nearly smooth with age, and she carries with her a small bundle of hand-dyed wool. She listens as vendors talk in hushed tones. The price of grain has gone up again. Foreign troops loiter at corners, but there is no real fear. The world has been uncertain for as long as she can remember. The empire, as they knew it, has already been dying for years. Today is no different. Farther away still, in the provinces that once formed the heart of Rome's power, Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, the slow disintegration of empire is already complete. In Britain, the legions departed decades ago. In North Africa, the Vandals hold dominion. Across these lands, loyalty has shifted away from emperors and toward local lords, bishops, and warlords who offer some semblance of stability. The empire's name remains, but its structure is hollow. Its fall today will barely be noticed. There will be no alarms sounded, no treaties burned, just a signature, a crown handed over by a boy who never truly ruled. And so, the sun continues to rise, casting golden light across fading mosaics, across drying fields, across the quiet stone of cities once filled with power. The Western Roman Empire does not fall today with a crash. It falls like a leaf finally loosening from the branch. And so the day begins. The morning stretches on, quiet and unhurried, thick with a silence that feels both fragile and full of consequence. In the low, gray light that settles over Ravenna, the imperial palace stirs, but without urgency or grandeur. The wide corridors, lined with fading mosaics, echo with the soft, deliberate footsteps of servants who move as though trying not to disturb the inevitable. One of them, a young man with tired eyes, hurries along the polished marble floor, carrying a folded tunic. It is not ceremonial. There will be no parade, no farewell speech from a balcony, no procession of senators in purple-trimmed togas. The day holds no spectacle. The fabric in his hands is modest, well-made, suited for an exit that will be recorded in quiet ink, not remembered in marble. The throne room is dim, the light through its high windows softened by layers of dust and age. Only a few guards remain, leaning against their spears. None are Romans in the old sense of the word. They are Heruli, Shiri, and other Germanic soldiers, mercenaries in service not to a vision of Rome, but to the purse of whoever claims to rule it next. They watch with a kind of weary detachment, their expressions hard to read. Loyalty is not expected, resistance even less. Romulus Augustulus stands by a narrow window, the early light striking his cheek. He is slight, barely more than a boy, with none of the bearing that once defined the emperors of old. His silence is not regal, but resigned. There is no fire in his eyes, no plea for justice, no threat of retaliation, only stillness. He is too young to have made this empire fall, and too old to pretend it still stands. In a small chamber nearby, a clerk sharpens a quill. The sound is sharp and methodical, a preparation for bureaucracy, not drama. Parchment is spread out. The ink is tested. The resignation document is drawn up in practiced, formal Latin. When it is read aloud in the afternoon, the words will be soft, the tone almost reverent, as if speaking them louder might make them harder to bear. Outside, the city does not share the palace's mood. Ravenna lives on, indifferent. The markets clatter with voices and the rustle of goods being unpacked. A baker's son weaves through foot traffic, delivering baskets of hard rolls to vendors setting up for the day. In the forum, craftsmen climb ladders to repair broken tiles on the public baths. They mutter about wages, about late payments, about a customer who still owes for last week's plasterwork. The emperor's name is rarely spoken, not out of disrespect, but because it simply doesn't matter. It hasn't for years. They are ruled now by habits, by transactions, by local necessity, the price of olive oil, the state of the road to Classe, the weather that threatens the olive harvest. These matter more than titles or crowns. In a shaded courtyard, an old official named Marcus sits at a chipped table. Once, he managed routes and dispatches for the imperial postal system, organizing relays from Milan to Gaul. His office has been closed for weeks. On his lap rests a worn letter, the edges frayed from repeated reading. It is from a cousin in Arelate, who speaks of chaos, towns abandoned, churches fortified, noble families fleeing into hills, bishops replacing magistrates. Marcus refolds the letter and sets it beside others, each a record of erosion. He does not feel anger, only a slow, sinking sense of drift, as though the world he served has quietly floated away from under his feet. A few miles inland, in a small church built with stones scavenged from Roman ruins, the bishop prepares his sermon. He is not young, but his hands are steady as they brush dust from the altar. Word has reached him that the boy emperor will step down, that Odoacer will take the title of king, not emperor. He knows the difference, and so does the world. His homily does not mention this. Instead, he speaks of gardens, of seeds buried in winter soil, of patience and silent growth. He tells his people that some kingdoms do not need palaces, that hope may still be found in silence. His congregation, farmers, cobblers, widows, nod slowly, grateful for a message that doesn't ask them to choose sides in a war they never joined. Farther down the Adriatic, in weather-beaten port towns, sailors tighten ropes on docked ships. Their boats creak as they settle with the tide. Eastern traders unload crates from the Levant and speak in hushed tones of shifting borders, of new powers rising where Roman governors once stood. They don't discuss Romulus. They hardly speak of Odoacer either. They speak of safety, of which roads are patrolled, which routes are raided, and which town councils will honor contracts. The empire to them is a memory, a brand stamped on coins that are now more valuable for their silver content than for the authority they represent. The sun climbs higher, burning through the haze. Children play in courtyards between old buildings, chasing one another with sticks, pretending to be soldiers or gods. Their shouts ring off stone, off brick, off fading murals. A potter at her wheel molds clay into bowls and pitchers. Her hands are cracked from labor, her brow furrowed in concentration. She doesn't look up when the neighbor calls news of the emperor's resignation. She has a kiln to fire before dusk. The empire will fall this afternoon, without violence, without spectacle, with only the quiet sigh of inevitability. The world will not halt. The sky will not darken. Bells will not toll. It will fall as a leaf falls from a tree that forgot it once ruled the forest. In a house just outside Ravenna's city walls, a family of modest means sits down to a breakfast of olives, cheese, and barley bread. The father, a stonemason by trade, breaks the morning silence with a grumble about an unpaid contract. His hands are thick with calluses, stained by lime and dust, proof of years spent repairing what others have abandoned. His wife listens with a weary patience, wiping crumbs from the face of their youngest child as she divides the bread into even pieces. There are rumors, she says quietly, that the imperial guards have not been paid in months. He nods, but doesn't answer. Everyone knows the treasury is empty. Gold no longer arrives from the provinces, because there are no provinces. The empire still claims Gaul, Spain, even parts of Africa. But these are lines on a map, dreams of old men clinging to fading titles. On the ground, in the mud and dust, they are someone else's lands now, claimed by chieftains, warlords, or simply by silence. Across the city, in what was once a thriving villa, weeds push through cracked mosaics. A fig tree leans into the colonnade, its branches brushing faded frescoes of gods and heroes. The estate belonged to a senator, once, but he fled years ago, retreating to an estate in Campania, if the gossip is to be believed. The caretakers stayed behind. They tend to the land still, out of habit more than duty. The villa is crumbling, its marble columns chipped and overgrown, but the garden still grows. Fennel and sage, beans, a vine that climbs the old sundial and bears fruit in late summer. Wildflowers bloom where slaves once toiled. A stray dog sleeps beneath a broken statue of Mercury, ears twitching at the rustle of lizards in the underbrush. At the city's edge, a cohort of mercenaries drills in an open field. Their armor is mismatched, scavenged from corpses and market stalls. Their commands are shouted in broken Latin. fractured by foreign accents and harsh laughter. These are not Romans. They never were. They fight for gold, and for now, Odoacer pays them. A young boy watches from the tree line, wide-eyed, mimicking the thrust of a spear with a stick. He doesn't understand what empire means, but he knows what power looks like, and it is loud and armored and foreign. His older brother tugs at his arm, warning him to stay hidden. These men take what they want, and a curious child is a vulnerable thing. In a dim scriptorium attached to a monastery, a monk leans over a manuscript, copying a text from Cicero. His fingers are ink-stained, his eyes red from long hours in candlelight. The room is cool, quiet, lined with shelves of parchment and wax tablets. Beeswax candles gutter low. He pauses to rest his hand and listens to the low murmur of chanting from the chapel next door. The empire falls, but the words of Rome, its law, its rhetoric, its memory, are preserved in ink, in silence, in prayer. Outside, a novice sweeps the cloister walk, humming a hymn passed down by monks who once served a living emperor. Along a country road, a group of merchants rides slowly. Their cart is piled with fabric, salted fish, and amphorae of oil. One of them carries a dagger beneath his tunic. The roads have grown dangerous. Bandits, displaced soldiers, and opportunists haunt the countryside. There is no longer a universal law to protect them. No distant governor who will send troops to avenge a robbery. Each town makes its own rules now, and safety is negotiated one village at a time. Still, trade continues, because it must. A widow in one town still needs wax for her votive candles. A fisherman in another trades eels for wool. Commerce limps along on shaky legs. The day stretches on. Somewhere, perhaps in the quiet palace chamber where he waits, Romulus Augustulus feels the minutes pass like pages turning in a book he never wrote. He is not Caesar. He is not Augustus. He is a boy in borrowed robes, placed on a throne that no longer commands obedience. Soon, he will be offered a villa in Campania, a quiet exile, a footnote to centuries of conquest and glory. He will accept it. There is no army coming, no allies, no miracle, only a slow yielding to the tide of history. Outside his window, the sunlight falls on an empty courtyard. The imperial banners still hang, but no one salutes them. Far away in Constantinople, the Eastern Emperor will read the news with a mixture of relief and disdain. The West, long a burden, has finally collapsed under its own weight. But even he knows, borders are illusions. Trouble has a way of crossing seas and climbing mountains, and in time it will find the East as well. For now, Ravenna stands. Its streets are busy. Its people work, pray, eat, sleep. Children play in alleys where senators once rode in triumph. Vendors shout beneath archways carved with forgotten victories. Life moves forward, not with fanfare, but with the quiet persistence of those who have learned to live through endings. The empire is gone. The world remains. The morning mist clings low over the wetlands outside Ravenna, curling around the base of a wooden bridge worn smooth by centuries of passage. Hooves, sandals, wheels, and bare feet. The air is damp, cold, and laced with the briny tang of the nearby Adriatic. Ducks stir in the shallows, scattering noisily as a pair of oxen plod slowly past, pulling a weathered cart laden with sacks of barley, grain, and dented amphorae wrapped in fraying ropes. The driver, an older man with skin like leather left in the sun too long, wears a woolen cap pulled low over his ears. He sits hunched, quiet, his posture shaped as much by age as by resignation. Beside him walks a younger man, barefoot, wrapped in a patched cloak that no longer holds warmth. He yawns, then coughs, the wet rasp of it echoing across the still, gray marshes. Neither speaks. They've long learned that words, like coin, are better saved. News, when it comes, is rarely worth hearing. As they approach the city gates, the scent of salt and dung thickens in the air, mingling with smoke and damp rot. Ravenna smells of tides, sweat, and labor. Wooden scaffolds cling to its crumbling stone walls, abandoned frameworks from repairs begun but never completed. Moss crawls between bricks. A gatekeeper leans on a spear dulled at the tip and nods them through without ceremony. He does not ask for documents or demand a toll. His breath fogs in the morning chill, and his eyes are hollow with disinterest. Who now enforces such rules? What authority remains to challenge even the smallest theft? Beyond the gates, life moves in a slow, muffled rhythm, like a song remembered in fragments. Street stalls creak open with the groan of old hinges and the clink of battered bronze coins. A boy chases a chicken through the muck, barefoot and laughing, while a woman shouts and hurries after him, her skirt lifted to her knees, hair wild and unbraided. A stray cat leaps from a windowsill, vanishing into the fog as if part of it. Inside a narrow alley off the Forum, a baker kneads dough with the methodical intensity of a man who no longer thinks about the work. His arms are corded with muscle. His sleeves are rolled high. His apron is dusted with flour and ash. The oven behind him glows faintly, fed with whatever he can find. Scraps of wood, broken furniture, even dried dung. Bread will be ready soon, coarse, dark loaves that fill the stomach if not the soul. A soldier leans against the doorway, scratching his beard, eyes lingering on the cooling rolls stacked on a plank of wood. He does not speak. The baker glances at him once, says nothing, and keeps working. There is no need for words. If the soldier wants bread, he will take it. No coin will change hands. The baker's silence is a bargain struck long ago, a quiet trade for peace and continued existence. Down the street, in the decaying curia, shafts of light pierce the broken roof, stirring up slow swirling motes of dust. This chamber once echoed with the voices of governors, magistrates, and envoys. Now, it houses a pair of squatters, a gaunt woman with clouded eyes who mumbles Latin verses half forgotten, and a younger companion who keeps watch from beneath a threadbare cloak. They've built a shelter from splintered benches, stones, and a discarded tapestry, once used in rites to Jupiter. To them, marble columns are not monuments. They are walls against the wind. The gods, the law, the empire, these are stories told by other people. Their concern is warmth, water, and whatever can be salvaged before someone else finds it first. On the outskirts of the city, a schoolhouse clings to a semblance of routine. Inside, a teacher scratches figures into a wax tablet with a worn stylus. Her students, 5 boys of different sizes and temperaments, sit cross-legged on the cracked tile floor, murmuring passages from Virgil and Cato, their voices thin but steady. Few understand what they recite. Their fathers were traders, soldiers, or stoneworkers. Some have vanished. Their mothers send them here not for knowledge, but for stability, for one room in which the hours still obey a rhythm. The teacher, her back stiff with years and her hair laced with gray, pauses mid-sentence to stare through the warped glass of the window. Outside, a bird lands, pecks at nothing and flies away. The boys continue reciting. The lesson, like the world, continues even without comprehension. In a sunlit courtyard, 2 men argue in soft tones over a goat that wandered into the wrong garden. Both lay claim to it. Their words are measured, not raised. A small crowd gathers, not out of curiosity but habit. No one expects violence. The goat, unbothered, nibbles at the weeds along the wall. Eventually, it chooses one man and follows him. The argument ends. No scrolls are consulted, no officials summoned. Just as they approach the city gates, the scent of salt and dung thickens in the air, mingling with smoke and damp rot. Ravenna smells of tides, sweat, and labor. Wooden scaffolds cling to its crumbling stone walls, abandoned frameworks from repairs begun but never completed. Moss crawls between bricks. A gatekeeper leans on a spear dulled at the tip and nods them through without ceremony. He does not ask for documents or demand a toll. His breath fogs in the morning chill, and his eyes are hollow with disinterest. Who now enforces such rules? What authority remains to challenge even the smallest theft? Beyond the gates, life moves in a slow, muffled rhythm, like a song remembered in fragments. Street stalls creak open with the groan of old hinges and the clink of battered bronze coins. A boy chases a chicken through the muck, barefoot and laughing, while a woman shouts and hurries after him, her skirt lifted to her knees, hair wild and unbraided. A stray cat leaps from a windowsill, vanishing into the fog as if part of it. Inside it, Ravenna lives, not as a capital of empire or a beacon of dominion, but as a place that breathes in spite of collapse. The empire has fallen, but the city remains, stitched together not by edicts or banners, but by memory, grit, and the stubborn will to carry on. The roads leading out of Ravenna fade slowly into a wilderness of marshland, tangled forest, and soft, unsteady soil, broken now and then by the remnants of once bustling villas or the crumbling outlines of old shrines overtaken by moss. These paths were once the lifeblood of an empire, the well-constructed arteries along which flowed soldiers with shining helmets, messengers bearing imperial seals, merchants pulling laden carts, and magistrates issuing decrees in the emperor's name. Now weeds creep between the weathered stones, and creeping ivy overtakes the cracked mile markers that once displayed the confidence of a Rome that had believed itself eternal. The Latin inscriptions are faded, incomplete, barely legible to even the most learned monks. The further one ventures from the city, the more the very memory of empire seems to dissolve into the quiet earth. In the distance, a procession of cloaked figures trudges along a ridgeline. Not a legion on patrol, but a cluster of weary pilgrims. Their feet are blistered, bare, wrapped in torn cloth. They carry no sacred relics, only stories and the names of saints on cracked lips. One holds a wooden cross close to his chest. Another hums softly, her voice dry and cracked from dust and long travel. They do not head toward a holy site. They move south, away from the mountains where the cold bites harder and darker. Rumors travel faster. Rumors of more violence, more invasions, more banners no one recognizes, more kings with names no Roman ever wrote down. In a small forgotten hamlet tucked in a shallow valley, where wild boar still root among the ruins of an aqueduct, a farmer hones a spade with slow, methodical strokes. His movements are unhurried, not from laziness, but from the absence of need. There are no quotas to fill, no overseers to impress. His wife stirs a pot of stew over a fire in their yard, and their children chase a chicken through overgrown weeds. The dry aqueduct, once a marvel of engineering that carried fresh water across miles from distant hills to vibrant cities, has become little more than a landmark now, a perch for birds, a playground for children, a monument to a forgotten infrastructure. Stones fall from it with the slow, inevitable pace of erosion, and time, one at a time, as if the land itself is carefully dismantling what remains of memory. A lone merchant appears, pausing to water his mule in a narrow stream below the aqueduct. He wears a medallion bearing the face of an emperor whose name has slipped from common use. He claims it offers protection. The farmer does not ask which emperor. It wouldn't matter even if he did. Far to the west, beyond the low ridge and deep woods, stands a derelict outpost. A faded and tattered standard still flutters weakly from a splintered pole above its crumbling gate. Its colors are dulled, its emblem barely distinguishable. A handful of weary men live within, calling themselves a garrison, though the title rings hollow now. They are veterans in name, too old to till fields, too injured to join another cause, and too proud to return home. They build fires each evening in the sagging barracks, share tales of campaigns in provinces they can no longer locate on maps, and speak occasionally of a general who once promised reinforcements that never came. That promise is now 5 winters old. One of the men spends his time carving chess pieces from goat bone, shaping knights and bishops as if their battlefields still held meaning. Another writes in a notebook, copying verses he only half understands. Their spears lean forgotten in a corner, metal turning to rust. They keep the gates barred, not out of fear, but out of habit. Within the stone walls of a nearby monastery, a solitary scribe leans over a scroll, transcribing a worn commentary on Virgil. His hands are stained with ink, his fingers cramped, his eyes red and unfocused from hours in the dim light of a narrow window. He does not know that the language he copies is already mutating, the Latin shifting into something new, something less ordered, more local. Outside, the wind sighs through the monastery's high arches. The monks no longer debate theology or the heavens. Their conversations concern food stores, the spread of illness, the patterns of the rain. When the abbot calls them to prayer, he reminds them, write carefully, eat slowly, waste nothing. We are not the last, he tells them, as if to reassure himself, but we may be the only ones still watching. Northward, beyond the Po River, a grand villa, once the pride of a Roman senator, stands in partial ruin. Yet it is not empty. A tribal chieftain, his name lost to formal record, has made it his hall. He wears a cuirass of Roman origin, salvaged from some forgotten battlefield, and drinks from silver goblets stolen from abandoned estates. His speech is a rough blend of Latin and his ancestral tongue, and though he walks through marble halls and lounges beneath cracked frescoes of gods and emperors, he treats the villa not as inheritance, but as prize. His followers fill the atrium, once a place for refined discussion, now used for rough councils and meat-heavy feasts. Statues of Roman deities still stand in the garden, defaced and silent. Children play among them, sword fighting with sticks, shouting in a mixture of dialects. When asked about the emperor, the chieftain laughs. There is no emperor, he says. Not for us. On one of the remaining trade roads, a merchant makes his slow way toward the coast. His cart holds olive oil in clay jugs, barrels of salted fish, bolts of dyed wool. He carries a tax seal from some forgotten official, stamped years ago and barely legible. He offers it to a toll keeper at a checkpoint. The man takes it without comment and waves him on. The merchant mutters a prayer, not just to Mercury but to St. Martin, hedging his faith. He is not sure which one might be listening. If the road holds, if no bandits appear, if the bridges remain intact, if the weather stays fair, he will reach the port. If not, he will vanish. His goods stolen, his mule gone, his story ended in a ditch. No chronicler will write his name. As night falls, an elderly woman sits by a fire outside a low hut where her family keeps sheep. She cradles her granddaughter in her arms, singing an old lullaby. It is Roman, perhaps. Or it could be older. Something passed from voice to voice since before the empire itself. No one knows who first sang it. She points to the stars above, naming them. Some in Latin, some in a language even she does not understand fully. The girl listens closely, wide-eyed, absorbing not just the names but the tone, the melody, the rhythm of something enduring. Rome is gone. The legions are dust, the senate halls are silent, and the marble has cracked. But the stories persist. The songs survive. In the glow of the fire and the hush of the evening wind, fragments of civilization pass on, like embers, carefully shielded from the dark. Across the sea, where the sun glints off the rolling waves of the eastern Mediterranean, the port city of Alexandria struggles to carry on, suspended between ritual and ruin, half in shadow and half in memory. Once the gleaming jewel of Hellenistic brilliance and a key Roman commercial hub, Alexandria now wears its past like an aging robe, still bearing the signs of greatness, still drawing reverence, but fraying at every seam. The great Pharos lighthouse, once a marvel of engineering and one of the ancient wonders of the world, stands now as a cracked and skeletal relic, its topmost tiers long since tumbled into the sea from storms and the endless churn of time. The library, that legendary beacon of knowledge, is long gone, burned, pillaged, scattered, but it echoes still in the minds of scholars who sift through the ashes, searching for pieces. In dim rooms tucked behind battered walls, a few remaining scribes continue their work, diligently copying fragile manuscripts salvaged from decay or rumor. They no longer work in marble halls or under the aegis of imperial decree. Instead, they crouch near oil lamps, hunched over scraps of parchment wrapped tightly in cloth against mold, humidity, and insects. They do this not for glory, nor for pay, but because the alternative is forgetting. There is no empire left to commission their work. Still, they copy. It is a quiet defiance, a kind of faith. Out in the open-air marketplace, life still stirs. Traders haggle with familiar fervor over salted fish and ripe dates, over dyed wool and aged wine. A former Roman tax collector, now a merchant, fingers foreign coins with suspicion and mutters calculations in a muddle of Greek and Coptic, lamenting the loss of standardized currency and imperial clarity. Nearby, a knot of gray-bearded veterans sit in the fractured shade of crumbling colonnades. They share cups of spiced water and memories from campaigns in distant Germania or the cold forests of Dacia. Stories that the younger locals barely grasp or believe. Children race past them, shrieking with laughter, chasing one another with sticks, their speech a wild blend of Latin, Greek, Coptic, and borrowed Berber, living proof that the old tongue has begun to unravel. The eagle insignias of the legions still cling to a few public buildings, now sun-bleached and pocked with age. They peer out over a city that no longer kneels to them. The docks remain busy, animated by the same old energy, the creak of wood, the barked orders, the salt sting in the air. Ships arrive and depart, not in service of the empire, but in pursuit of private trade. Profit, not patriotism, drives them. The paperwork is different now. Gone are the official stamps and seals of Rome. In their place are hurried marks, personal signs, and the authority of habit. Captains grumble, but the sea still moves, and so must they. Down a narrow alley, away from the bustle, a physician tends to the sick in a low-ceiling room. Her tools, worn smooth by decades of use, were once her father's, passed down along with a fading Roman education. She reads Galen and Hippocrates like old companions, applying what she can from texts that are as fragile as the patients she treats. Without an imperial college, without guild oversight, she is doctor, midwife, and healer by sheer determination. Her patients include dock workers, street sweepers, and widows, people with coughs, fevers, infected wounds. She listens, she treats, she cleans. The public baths are long abandoned, overtaken by vines and dust, but she alone can still decipher the Latin carved above their entrances. To the north, past the city walls and along the craggy coastline, lies a quiet fishing village. There, hammers ring out not in forge or war factory, but against weathered hulls in need of repair. Old boats are patched with mismatched timber. Nets are rewoven with aching fingers. The fishermen do not speak of Rome. They pray to a mixture of saints and ancestral spirits, an ever-evolving faith stitched from the scraps of older beliefs. One man, gray-haired and missing teeth, still paints dolphins on his boat's prow, a tradition meant to invoke Neptune's favor, though no one remembers precisely why. It is a habit passed down, a superstition that persists simply because it always has. Further inland, in the fields that hug the Nile, a former legionnaire plows a narrow strip of dry earth. His old armor, once polished to shine under the desert sun, now rusts quietly behind his modest home. His sword has been melted down, reforged into a pruning hook. His hands, once calloused by shield and spear, now blister from the plow. His life moves to a new rhythm, not the stomp of marching feet, but the slow cycle of seed, sun, and harvest. His children have never seen a soldier in uniform. They do not ask about the empire. They know drought. They know fig season. They know that their father walks slower each year. Rome, to them, is a distant murmur in their father's throat, a shape in the wrinkles of his brow. Within what remains of the educated elite, a handful of nobles still cling to the old formalities. They wear togas no longer dyed with imperial purple, sit at long wooden tables with mismatched cutlery and tell stories of ancestors who once debated Cicero's successors. But their letters now travel nowhere. The couriers are gone or refuse to ride. The roads are fractured, dangerous, their way stations abandoned to bandits and silence. Once grand villas stand shuttered or overgrown. The children of these aristocrats learned Latin and rhetoric out of duty, not purpose. They ask why they must memorize poems in a language no one speaks anymore. The answers their elders give are brittle. Even in the temples that still stand, priests tend to altars with uncertain hands. Statues have lost limbs or faces. Offerings are made in smaller coin. The prayers continue, but they are quiet. Some gods are worshipped out of fear, others out of muscle memory. Few expect miracles. The divine now lives in private rooms and whispered hopes. This is no burning collapse. There is no single day, no trumpet blast to mark the end. The fall of the Roman Empire, here in Alexandria, is not an event. It is a slow, unbraiding unraveling of what was once a mighty rope. It is a world that forgets itself in pieces. Life continues. The tide still rises. The sun still gleams over the harbor. But the shape of power has changed. And so has the silence that comes in its place. Far from the sparkling Mediterranean coast, where the warm winds once carried not just salt and rumor, but imperial orders and merchant sails, the heartland of Gaul finds itself suspended in an ambiguous and uncertain state, no longer fully Roman, and yet not entirely reborn as something else. In the vast countryside that lies beyond the eroded shadows of crumbling amphitheaters and fractured aqueducts, farms still yield their grain and olives, but without the synchronizing force that once connected every field, road, and market stall to the heartbeat of Rome. The intricate bureaucracy that underpinned land ownership, taxation, and crop quotas has fallen into disuse. Ancient registries, once handled by a trained class of imperial scribes, gather dust in abandoned municipal buildings whose roofs sag and whose walls are slowly being claimed by moss and ivy. In the decaying market squares of former Roman towns like Lugdunum and Arelate, trade persists, but it now operates on instinct rather than statute. Commerce, once carefully regulated by imperial edict, thrives in a more improvised, chaotic form. Weavers, tanners, and smiths establish their workshops in repurposed temples and former basilicas. Elegant marble columns, once emblems of civic order, now brace thatched roofs patched with stitched hides and salvaged canvas. Once sacred altars are used as grinding stones or work tables, their carvings worn down by generations of practical hands. In back alleys and open courtyards, children play among the toppled statues of emperors, scrambling up their shoulders and legs, oblivious to the once commanding glories these stone figures represented. Local authority is now as fragmented as the empire itself. Power belongs to whoever can hold it. Some leaders are former Roman magistrates, clinging to fading titles. Others are tribal chieftains who once paid tribute to Rome and now rule with the strength of arms or the prestige of ancestry. Their rule is improvised, their justice uneven. These men and their households collect dues not in coin, but in livestock, grain, and favors. They broker peace between villages through arranged marriages and whispered promises shared over fires after dark. Some still wear bits of old Roman armor, breastplates and greaves polished smooth, embossed insignia barely visible, not because they offer protection, but because they offer memory, a visual link to a vanishing past. Their courts are strange hybrids, mixing Roman laws with tribal customs in a blend that no senator would recognize, but which locals accept as normal. In secluded hilltop monasteries, newly built from rough stone and salvaged tile, monks labor by candlelight, with quills made from bird feather and ink derived from bark and berries. They transcribe what remains of Roman knowledge. The monks work slowly, carefully copying passages from Virgil, Cicero, and Tacitus. Latin remains the language of record, but it is increasingly filtered through a new kind of tongue, part Latin, part Gaulish, part the nascent rhythms of what will someday be French. Many do not fully understand what they write, but they sense its value. In an age where darkness grows at the edges of memory, these words are a fragile flame. The legendary Roman roads still stretch across the land like ancient arteries, but they are no longer maintained. Weeds break through the paving stones. In places, entire sections have collapsed into sinkholes or been dismantled for building material. Bandits roam freely, especially along the more secluded routes. With no legions left to patrol, travelers form armed caravans. These groups carry not imperial goods, but baskets of foraged herbs, dried fish, smoked meats, and crude pottery. Milestones, once engraved with the names of emperors and the distances to Rome, are weathered beyond recognition. Pilgrims and merchants pass them silently, their paths guided not by imperial cartography, but by tales passed from mouth to ear, by the locations of holy relics, or the whispers of safe havens guarded by cloistered monks. In modest chapels and wooden churches built beside or atop pagan ruins, Christianity continues its transformation. The religion, once persecuted and later institutionalized by Rome, now thrives in obscurity and adaptation. Broken statues of Jupiter and Mars are replaced by wooden crosses and relic-filled shrines. Golden boxes that once held imperial rings now house fragments of bone or cloth attributed to saints. Services are held in Latin, yes, but also in the local dialects, and many attending do not understand every word, only the intent behind them. Bishops emerge not just as spiritual leaders, but as community arbiters, often holding more sway than any local noble. They negotiate peace between warring clans, bless crops, and oversee the storage of grain. The church is now less a servant of empire, and more a surrogate for it. In private homes, echoes of Rome persist in form, if not in function. Many dwellings still possess their original mosaic floors, though chipped and dulled by time. Rushes are spread across the patterns to prevent cold and dirt from spreading. The walls bear fragments of once vibrant frescoes. Mythological scenes faded into abstraction, symmetrical designs slowly peeling away. Kitchens have been simplified. The elaborate Roman cookbooks are gone, replaced by a daily improvisation shaped by weather, soil, and memory. Meals are sparse, but warm. Bread is coarser, made from less refined grains. Salt is a treasure. Spices from the East are remembered in stories rather than tasted. Wine is mixed with water and drunk from pottery repaired countless times. What once was luxurious is now simply functional, and function is precious. Language, too, has begun to splinter. The Latin spoken in Gaul is not the Latin of Cicero. It is something altered, rounded at the edges, mixed with local expressions, and constantly evolving. Children grow up speaking it without knowing its roots. Songs are sung in this vernacular, songs that no senator would recognize, filled with repetition and rhythm suited more to memory than to elegance. Prayers are said in it, prayers that blend Christian petitions with remnants of older beliefs, whispered in fields or carved onto wooden charms. The collapse of the Roman Empire is not a singular catastrophe. It does not come with fire and trumpet, but with a long unraveling of threads. In Gaul, there are no declarations or final battles to mark the change. Life simply adjusts. Temples become workshops. Baths become storehouses. Titles lose meaning. The sun still rises, the wheat still grows, and people adapt. The empire does not fall in a day. It seeps out of the corners of life, replaced not by conquest, but by necessity. Yet, in the quiet persistence of the people, in their rituals, their languages, their songs and prayers, something of Rome lingers. The shape of a street, the curve of an archway, the weight of a word. All of these carry echoes of an empire that is no longer there, but not entirely gone. What was Rome is not forgotten. It is simply becoming something else. In the Italian countryside, far from the grandeur of palaces and senates, life moves on beneath a sky that has witnessed empires rise and fall. South of the once thundering heart of Rome, the rhythms of the land persist. Here, farmers move through their fields just as their ancestors did, coaxing olives from ancient trees and guiding sheep across low stone terraces worn smooth by centuries of use. There is no sign of cataclysm, no grand declaration that the empire has ended. The collapse of Rome, so sharp and catastrophic in the ledgers of historians, is felt here more like a slow, fading echo, a long, gentle exhale that still drifts across the hills. There are no banners flying, no orders barked in Latin. Instead, the sounds are intimate. The clatter of iron hose on dry soil, the bleating of goats, the low murmur of prayer whispered before dawn. The transformation is one of atmosphere rather than spectacle. Roads that once saw governors and generals now bear the feet of merchants, pilgrims, and refugees. Life is patchwork, stitched from memory and necessity. Villages strung like beads along crumbling Roman roads depend on what still functions. The wells dug deep by engineers long dead, the communal ovens blackened by generations of bread, the planting cycles inherited without understanding their origin. The empire is gone, but the habits it cultivated persist like muscle memory. In municipal centers, the silence is deafening. Buildings that once bustled with clerks, runners, and scribes now stand half empty. The statues in front of them have lost noses, arms, or heads. The benches in council chambers are vacant, the scrolls in their cabinets curling at the edges, ink smudged and unread. Where once a magistrate might ride from Rome to oversee legal disputes or collect tribute, now no one comes. No one sends word. The central pulse of empire has stopped, not with a roar, but with a sigh. The bureaucracy that once defined Roman life has withered not from violence, but from abandonment. Across the countryside, villas, once testaments to wealth and Roman engineering, stand in all stages of decay and repurposing. Those still occupied are shells of their former glory, with families crowded into wings that were once reserved for servants. Grand marble baths are filled with hay or left dry and echoing. Ornate mosaics showing the myths of old crumble underfoot, or are scavenged for hearthstones. Where water once gushed through lead-lined aqueducts, rustling fountains, and underground heating systems, now there is only silence. Lead pipes have been removed for reuse, marble slabs chipped away to patch walls, and frescoes are faded shadows on the plaster. These ruins are not seen as sacred, but useful. Among the local elites, old symbols of power lose their weight. To wear a toga now is more costume than statement. The few remaining nobles cling to status through land ownership or by commanding loyalty from nearby farmers. Yet their influence is no longer tied to Rome, but to the strength of their own hands and voices. A man who can rally 20 men to defend a granary, or who can organize a grain store for winter, holds sway. Ancient titles are spoken in jest or in hushed tones at feasts, a ghostly echo of an age that no longer exists. Practical leadership who can feed, protect, and heal is all that matters. In the small settlements scattered across the hills and valleys, community is everything. People share what they have because they must. Tools are passed hand to hand. Ovens are fired by many families in turn, and grain is stored communally when the harvest allows. Banditry is common, as is superstition. Village watches take turns keeping night fires burning, not just against thieves, but against wolves and spirits whispered about in the dark. Justice is meted out locally and informally. Elders, strong men, and those with surplus grain act as judges. Roman law is still invoked, property rights, inheritance customs, but these are warped by practicality. Latin survives, but mostly in pieces, in rural dialects peppered with remnants of imperial speech. Religion has changed too. The mighty temples of Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva are neglected or converted. Vines crawl across columns. Altar stones are buried under dust. In their place, small wooden chapels stand at crossroads and on hilltops, sometimes built from the debris of old forums. Christianity is everywhere now, but it too has adapted. Priests live like the people they serve, barely literate, dressed in patched robes, speaking a gospel memory as much as text. They bless crops, tend wounds, and act as arbiters. Their authority comes not from Rome or any bishop, but from being present. They are the new glue of the villages. The old world still flickers in stories. Around fires, elders speak of the legions who once passed through, of the sound of marching feet on stone, of gold coins bearing the faces of emperors whose names no one now recalls. Their grandchildren listen wide-eyed, but already their language has changed. Their loyalties are local, and the grandeur of Rome feels more myth than memory. Still, families bury their dead with Roman rites. They mark their fields with Roman charms. They wear fragments of imperial brooches. The identity that was Rome has not vanished, but dissolved slowly into the land. This is what the world looked like when the empire fell, not torn apart in a day, but unraveled thread by thread over years. In the olive groves and the crumbling villas, life continues, half remembered and half invented, shaped by the past, yet already becoming something else. The empire is not gone. It has been absorbed, transformed, and scattered. Its end was not a death, but a transformation, and in its place is a world still figuring out what comes next. In the streets of Ravenna, where the last emperor once held court, silence hangs thick in the air. The city, once a beacon of imperial administration, is subdued, its once splendid avenues narrowed by weeds and encroaching decay. The grand mosaics that once dazzled diplomats now watch over empty basilicas and silent chambers. In corners where palace guards once stood, children now chase one another, their laughter soft, unaware of the weight of history beneath their feet. Ravenna, with its fading frescoes and half-shuttered villas, stands not as a symbol of resistance or ruin, but as a place caught mid-breath, unsure whether to remember or forget. At the harbor, merchant ships dock quietly, their sails frayed and patched. Trade hasn't stopped, but it has shifted. Fewer spices from the east, fewer amphorae filled with garum or wine. Instead, simple goods, grain from the hinterlands, rough textiles, fish dried under the sun. The networks that once spanned an empire now resemble loose threads, dependent not on the might of Rome but on local deals, bartered favors, and long memories. Greek sailors mutter about raids along the coast, and some vessels carry extra oarsmen, half traders, half defenders. Trust is currency, and risk is a constant companion. In what was once the imperial palace, pigeons roost above crumbling archways. The marble floors, once polished to mirror shine, are dusty and cracked. Occasionally, a few local officials shuffle in, managing property records or dispensing village mandates. There are still scribes, still seals pressed into wax, but the echo of authority has dulled. Decrees take longer to arrive, if they come at all. And, more often, decisions are made by the wealthy landowners whose estates encircle the city like a wall of grain and goats. In the poorer quarters, people mend what they can and ignore what they can't. The bathhouses are mostly abandoned. Without steady heat or fresh water, the stone pools are empty, their mosaics chipped and clouded. Where communal steam once washed the weariness from Roman shoulders, now stands quiet neglect. Some of the baths are used to store grain. Others house livestock during harsh winters. Even the statues have taken on new meaning, no longer gods or ideals, but perches for laundry lines or placeholders for scarecrows. Education is narrowed. The once proud schools where boys read Cicero and studied the movements of the heavens are mostly closed. Those who still learn do so from half-complete scrolls, passed hand to hand like smuggled treasure. Teachers are rare, often elderly clerics who speak with a reverence not just for the texts, but for the very act of learning. They teach letters, numbers, and prayers, not because it guarantees power, but because it preserves something precious, the illusion that understanding the world might still shape it. In the city's churches, incense still burns. Mass is held, but often in rustic Latin, merged with local dialects and peppered with gestures borrowed from older pagan customs. Candles flicker before saints who were once soldiers or governors. The Virgin Mary is dressed in robes that echo imperial fashion, her halo rendered with the gold leaf that once gilded imperial murals. Faith persists, but like everything else, it has adapted. Christianity has survived not because it was imperial, but because it could bend to the needs of a people with fading memories and uncertain tomorrows. Families gather at dusk, as they always have. Meals are simpler now: flatbread, lentils, salted fish. The rich eat better, but even they cannot summon the variety or extravagance once expected in imperial banquets. Salt is treasured. Olive oil, when it runs low, is mixed with rendered fat. Yet, in the sharing of meals and the passing of cups and the telling of stories, life feels oddly stable. Not secure, but familiar. Rituals persist not because they are mandated, but because they are remembered. Outside the city, the countryside presses in. Forests have begun to reclaim roads. Brambles grow along aqueducts. Roots undermine stone bridges. Farmers know which ruins to avoid, not because of danger, but out of respect. Some say ghosts walk there. Others say treasure lies buried beneath the moss. Few bother to dig. The land is enough: barley, olives, sheep, chickens. These sustain the villages now more than any tax decree or imperial grain dole ever did. Ravenna, once the final breath of empire, now exists in a quiet twilight. Its people don't mourn the loss of emperors. They don't count the years by consuls or campaigns. They mark time by seasons, by births and burials, by the ebb and flow of the Adriatic tide. The empire, in its final whispers, has left behind not a people in despair, but a people adjusting to a new rhythm. They are no longer Romans in any official sense, but in the curve of their roads, the shape of their prayers, and the dreams they barely name. Rome lingers, distant, faded, and never quite gone. In the heart of former Gaul, where Roman legions once marched with purpose, the towns and villages now move at a different pace. Roads that once echoed with the steady clink of armored boots are slowly being overtaken by grasses and shrubs. The great military highways built to connect an empire are still used, but more by herders and local traders than by soldiers or state messengers. Way stations lie abandoned or repurposed. Some have become inns, others storage sheds, and a few stand as ghostly ruins. Stone skeletons with moss-covered walls that offer shelter only to birds and rain. In Lutetia, once a thriving Roman settlement that will one day become Paris, the stone structures remain, but many now wear wooden additions, makeshift repairs made from timber, harvested nearby. The once gleaming facades are blackened with soot from hearth fires. Latin is still spoken in fragments, in prayers, in the ledgers of merchants, in the mutterings of older men, but a new tongue is forming, shaped by the mouths of Frankish tribes and local dialects. It's not yet French, but it's something different, something in between. Inside the modest forums and markets, commerce continues, though the goods are humble. Where once traders haggled over Egyptian papyrus or Syrian glass, now they barter with goat cheese, woven baskets, hand-forged nails. Coinage is rare. Many transactions are done in kind: eggs for flour, shoes for firewood. Some coins still bear the faces of emperors long dead. Children play with them, unaware of the weight they once carried. The local villa, once the estate of a Roman patrician, is ruled now by a powerful landowner. Perhaps a retired soldier, perhaps a warlord's cousin. Someone with enough men to keep the granaries safe. His household is a strange blend of Roman and barbarian. His sons are trained to read and write, but also to ride and fight. His daughters wear wool dresses, stitched with designs that borrow from both Roman mosaics and tribal patterns. Feasts are held with both bread baked in clay ovens and meat roasted over open fires. The old ways are not gone. They are just no longer alone. At the town's small chapel, built from the stones of a former temple, a local priest leads evening prayers. He wears a robe that once would have marked him as a minor Roman bureaucrat, but now serves as sacred vestment. He speaks of Christ, but also of saints who were once legionaries, martyrs who once carried imperial banners. The people kneel on cold stone, cross themselves, and whisper their sins into the smoky air. Religion has become a tether, a way to hold on to something as the world around them shifts. The children of this post-imperial world grow up with two histories. One, told by the old men in crumbling villas, is of an empire that stretched across oceans, where roads were straight and emperors were gods. The other, told by the fireside and in the fields, is of raids and cold winters, of famines endured and harvests saved. They grow up not with ambition of conquest, but with hopes of survival, of enough food, of safety through the night. On the northern frontiers, where Roman walls once stood to keep the wild tribes at bay, there are few soldiers left. The forts are collapsing, their once sturdy gates creaking or broken. In their place, local militias form. Young men train with spears and wooden shields. Their leaders are elected by acclaim or feared into obedience. Some wear bits of old Roman armor, a breastplate, a helmet with missing plumes, but most fight in woolen leather. They defend their homes not in the name of empire, but out of necessity. And in the rural villages, far from even these remnants of military order, life carries on with quiet repetition. Families tend to pigs and fowl, dig ditches, repair fences. Women gather herbs and dry them for winter. Children gather kindling. Elders tell stories. There is music, simple and percussive, played on flutes and drums. There is laughter and squabbling, love and childbirth, sorrow and death. The rhythms of the earth have replaced the rhythms of Rome. The world hasn't ended. It has shrunk. The grandeur is gone. But in its place there is something else. A dense network of lives lived in the shadow of a vanished empire. They do not call themselves Romans, but they live among Roman stones. They do not follow Roman law, but they walk Roman roads. They do not remember Caesar or Constantine, but they recite prayers in the language those men once spoke. Across the old empire, in hamlets and hollowed cities, in forgotten temples and fortified farmhouses, life goes on. The empire has fallen, but the people remain. And in the cracks of history, in the silence after the fall, a new world slowly begins to grow. In Ravenna, the fading western capital of the Roman Empire, the final echoes of imperial authority linger faintly in stone halls and mosaic-covered basilicas. Once the seat of emperors and bishops, it now sits in quiet transition. The imperial palace, still standing but increasingly hollow, sees fewer visitors by the day. The courtiers have dwindled to a handful, scribes, notaries, and weary soldiers awaiting orders that no longer come. Its halls, once animated by diplomacy and intrigue, are filled with the sound of boots on marble and the distant fluttering of pigeons nesting in high arches. The Bishop of Ravenna, now one of the most powerful voices in the city, presides over a shrinking flock. The churches remain full on holy days, but the grandeur has dulled. Gold leaf peels from murals, incense is stretched thin, and sacred texts are copied not on vellum, but on scraps of reused parchment. The bishop's sermons are as much about survival as salvation. He speaks of Christian duty, but also of vigilance, community, and the need to defend against coastal raiders. Religion here has become a scaffold for civic order. Outside the basilica, the city streets bustle, but it is not the bustle of a thriving empire. Vendors sell barley, salted fish, and turnips rather than the exotic goods of the East. The harbor, once a vital link to the Adriatic and beyond, is clogged with silt and choked with broken piers. Fewer ships arrive now, and those that do often bear messages of warning rather than goods. Pirates to the south, Gothic warbands inland, a grain delay from Sicily. In a shaded courtyard behind the remnants of a school, an elderly grammarian teaches a half-dozen boys. He recites Virgil in a cracked voice, correcting their pronunciation with the weary care of someone who knows they will never master it. These boys will not become senators or imperial bureaucrats. They may become priests, scribes, or merchants, perhaps if they're lucky, trusted men in a bishop's house. But the curriculum is still Roman. The syllables, the gestures, the scrolls, they echo a world that no longer exists. Beyond the city's outer roads, the countryside is a mosaic of abandonment and adaptation. Roman villas sit in varying states of collapse or repurposing. One might be the stronghold of a local baron, another used for storage by farmers, another simply left to the ivy and wind. The latifundia, those sprawling estates once worked by hundreds of slaves and managed by distant aristocrats, are now divided and local. Former slaves, tenants, and laborers have become landholders, not by law, but by possession and time. They till soil, patch aqueducts, and redirect rainwater as best they can. The farms feed the city, just barely. Grain stores are low by autumn. Meat is often dried and salted with care, and wine is made in small batches, more sour than sweet. The rhythms of agriculture have replaced those of bureaucracy. No more imperial tax collectors ride out on horseback with scrolls and seals. Instead, communities negotiate among themselves who owes what to whom. In Ravenna's outskirts, small bands of foreign warriors can sometimes be seen moving through the woods, Ostrogoths perhaps, or wandering Franks. Sometimes they come to trade, other times to demand. They are tolerated so long as they remain peaceful. Locals keep watch from the old Roman towers, half collapsed but still defensible. Spears are kept close, and at night the gates are barred. Despite it all, Ravenna does not fall. It persists, not through strength, but through inertia, memory, and necessity. Its people remember Rome not as glory, but as a kind of scaffolding, a frame that still holds parts of life in place, even if the structure itself is crumbling. They light candles in ancient chapels, gather in baths now dry and overgrown, and tell stories beneath frescoes of forgotten emperors. The empire has faded from law, from politics, from power, but in Ravenna it still lingers in daily ritual, in worn habit, and in the stones beneath every footstep. In the province of Africa, once a gleaming jewel of the Roman economy, the city of Carthage persists in a twilight state. Once a major hub of trade, culture, and administrative power, it now balances between survival and ruin. The Roman baths, though largely unused, still dominate the skyline with their faded columns and shattered vaults. The great cisterns, masterworks of Roman engineering, still hold water, though not as reliably as they once did. Aqueducts cracked by time and neglect funnel only trickles, and local residents fill jugs from streams or communal wells. The familiar infrastructure is present but worn, a skeleton of former abundance. The bishop here commands more respect than any governor. In fact, no imperial magistrate has visited in years. The bishop presides over councils of landowners and clergy, determining policy, settling disputes, even organizing defense. He is both spiritual shepherd and political anchor. At Mass, he reads aloud imperial decrees that are months, sometimes years, out of date, not for their relevance, but for the semblance of order they offer. The people listen out of habit more than hope. The harbor of Carthage, once teeming with vessels from Alexandria, Constantinople, and Hispania, lies quiet. Barnacles cover the wharves. Fishermen mend nets beside grounded ships. The few merchants who still arrive come not to enrich, but to scrape profit from what little remains. Olive oil and grain, Carthage's prized exports, are produced in smaller quantities now. The hinterlands are fractured, with farmland broken into scattered holdings. These are often overseen not by absentee senators, but by self-styled lords or organized monasteries. Along the old Roman roads leading into the countryside, the milestones stand crooked or buried. Travelers, few and cautious, pass with arms at their side. Bandits roam more freely now, sometimes former soldiers or mercenaries left unpaid. Forts and way stations have either fallen into disuse or become the property of local war bands. Still, the roads are used, because they are familiar, because they are there. In the villas surrounding the city, Roman aristocrats have either fled or adapted. Some have cloaked their Roman titles in religious authority, becoming patrons of monasteries or churches. Others have formed uneasy alliances with Berber tribes, marrying daughters into their ranks or exchanging land for protection. The divisions between Roman and Berber, citizen and outsider, begin to blur. In this world, identity is fluid. Survival favors those who adapt. Within Carthage's walls, a modest school still operates in the shadow of an ancient temple. The teacher is a deacon, his students the sons of merchants, scribes, and artisans. They copy Latin prayers and fables onto reused parchment. The language is changing, the accent shifting. Some phrases are more Berber than Latin now, but the rhythm of learning continues because it has always been done, because it feels like civilization. Carthage's daily life is no longer ruled by the distant emperor. Taxation, if it exists, is enforced by local power structures, the bishop's tithe, a monastery's share, or a noble's demand. The coins that change hands bear the faces of long-dead emperors. Some coins are clipped, others counterfeit. Still, they are used, trusted more than promises. On feast days, the streets fill with chants and incense. Processions wind past cracked mosaics, and church bells ring from towers built atop old Roman forums. There is celebration, even joy. Children laugh, dogs bark, and food is shared. These moments, brief and fragile, give shape to the world. They are not Rome's triumph, but something else. Resilience in the face of absence. Even as the empire vanishes from maps and laws, Carthage remembers. It remembers in its stones, in the curves of its arches, in the quiet pride of its people. The city does not wait for Rome to return. It continues, reshaping itself from the debris of empire into something enduring, something deeply human. In the rugged highlands of northern Britannia, the distant echoes of empire have all but faded into the mist. The legions are gone, withdrawn decades ago, and with them the promise of Rome's security and structure. What remains are fragments, crumbling stone outposts overtaken by moss and heather, rusting tools buried beneath soil, and the distant memory of order among chaos. The local settlements, scattered hill forts, timber huts, and stone farmsteads, rely on tradition more than law. In these remote regions, there are no magistrates, no tax collectors, no imperial representatives. The emperor's name has not been heard here in years. Instead, local chieftains and kin-based councils govern, maintaining customs that predate Roman conquest and have now outlived it. Elders adjudicate disputes. War bands gather under charismatic leaders, often former Roman auxiliaries or descendants of mixed blood, whose knowledge of Latin military discipline is seen as both exotic and useful. Hadrian's Wall, once a definitive boundary of Rome's northernmost reach, stands as a silent monument. Portions have collapsed into moorland or been dismantled for building material. Sheep graze between the broken stones. In some places, locals still refer to it with reverence, calling it the Long Wall, or attributing its construction to giants or long-dead kings. Its original purpose is forgotten, but its presence is a reminder of an age now past. Trade in the north has shifted dramatically. The Roman roadways, though worn and partially overgrown, still provide routes between villages and tribal centers. Oxen-drawn carts creak over them, transporting wool, salted fish, and barley. Roman coinage is rare, often kept as curiosities or melted down for jewelry. Barter dominates the economy. Goats for iron tools, cheese for linen. Occasionally, a trader arrives from the south bearing amphorae of wine or glass beads, relics of a broader world that seems ever more distant. Religious life is diverse and evolving. Pagan traditions tied to the land remain strong. Sacred groves, stone circles, seasonal festivals. Yet Christianity has crept northward, carried by monks in rough-spun robes who travel from village to village preaching the gospel in halting Brythonic. Small wooden chapels stand beside ancient standing stones. The faith coexists uneasily with older beliefs. Some leaders invoke Christ and the old gods in the same breath, hedging their prayers to cover all possibilities. In fortified homesteads, families gather around hearths, telling stories of ancestors, heroes, and Roman soldiers who once patrolled these lands. Children learn to hunt with slings, to recognize weather by the clouds, and to guard sheep against wolves and raiders. Their world is smaller than the one their grandparents knew, but not without dignity or rhythm. Literacy is scarce. Parchment is rare and precious, used only by priests or in monastic enclaves. The few who can write use runes or Latin script interchangeably. Oral tradition carries history forward. Songs, legends, and genealogies passed down from memory. These tales are more vital than any text. They preserve identity. Roman architecture lingers in the south, in villas, temples, and baths. But here in the highlands, memory has replaced marble. The local people remember Rome not as a living power, but as a season that once came and went. They speak of the Romans the way others speak of spirits, present once, powerful, and now departed. Yet, life continues. Fields are plowed, cattle bred, fires lit. The empire may have fallen, but the land remains. The people endure, not in defiance of Rome's absence, but because they were never wholly Roman to begin with. What came with the empire was borrowed, tested, and adapted. What remains is something local, resilient, and entirely its own. In the ancient heartland of the eastern Mediterranean, the city of Antioch stirs in the late morning haze. Once a crown jewel of the Roman East, Antioch now stands on the edge of uncertainty. Nestled between the mountains and the Orontes River, its strategic and cultural significance remains immense, but its strength is fraying. The markets still bustle, the mosaics still shimmer in the sun, but beneath the vibrancy is the low, persistent hum of worry. The city's Roman governors have grown fewer in number and weaker in influence. Many of the imperial officials have either fled or gone silent, and in their place, local elites fill the vacuum. Wealthy landowners, bishops, and former imperial officers who now answer to no higher power but the shifting allegiances of the region. Power is transactional. Allegiances are fragile, Decisions are made not in marble halls but in whispered conversations between the city's power brokers. Antioch's population is a mixture of Romanized Syrians, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and a growing number of Arab merchants. The city's cosmopolitan nature, once a source of pride, now contributes to its vulnerability. Different communities carry different loyalties, some to the idea of Rome, others to their own traditions, and many simply to survival. When the legions retreated or were redeployed to more desperate fronts, they left behind a garrison of mercenaries and local militias, often underpaid and unreliable. The great colonnaded streets that once hosted imperial parades are now cluttered with hawkers selling dried fruits, incense, and amulets against plague. Earthquakes have damaged many of the grander buildings. Columns tilt, aqueducts crack, and broken statues lie half buried in the dust. Reconstruction happens slowly, if at all. Funds are low. Morale is lower. Still, the public baths function. The amphitheater holds occasional performances, and the agora continues to pulse with trade. Religious life in Antioch is layered and often tense. Christianity dominates the public sphere. Bishops wield tremendous influence, and churches rise where temples once stood. The Bishop of Antioch commands not only spiritual authority but political power, negotiating with military leaders and foreign envoys. Yet not all are Christians, and not all Christians agree. Debates over heresies, Arianism, Nestorianism, monophysitism spill into public argument. Theological disputes erupt into brawls. Riots are not uncommon. Faith is everywhere, but unity is elusive. Monasteries dot the hills outside the city, and their monks, part ascetics, part political advisors, hold sway through reputation and austerity. Pilgrims arrive from distant provinces, drawn by relics and holy sites, bringing stories of cities in ruin, villages overrun, and strange new rulers in lands once loyal to Rome. In the narrow alleys, the people of Antioch adjust. Blacksmiths forge plows alongside swords. Scholars copy scrolls by candlelight. Women weave linen and whisper news gathered from returning traders. Children chase dogs through the courtyards of former senators. The air is thick with spices and dust, laughter and foreboding. Everyone feels it, the slow drift of the world they once knew into something else. Some pretend Rome still rules. Others say Rome is dead and only hasn't noticed yet. A few speak of Constantinople as the true capital now, placing their hopes in the Eastern Court, in its gold, and its armies. But those hopes are thin. Letters from Constantinople arrive late, if at all. What comes more regularly are rumors, Persian advances, Gothic raids, taxes increasing, silver coins debased. Still, life presses forward. The olive groves are harvested, the bread ovens burn hot, and prayers rise each morning and night. Antioch is no longer what it was, but it is not yet what it will become. It clings to the remnants of empire while forging a path into an unknown world. Here, in this fragile moment, the city waits, quietly enduring, always adapting. Across the empire's shattered shell, far from the palaces of Constantinople or the markets of Carthage, on the western coast of what had once been the Roman heartland, lies the quiet settlement of Tarraco, modern-day Tarragona, in Spain. In the shadow of once mighty walls, beneath the tired gaze of broken statues, life carries on, threadbare, but stubborn. Tarraco was once a hub of administration and maritime commerce, a provincial capital along the glittering Mediterranean. Now its forums are half deserted, and its temples have been converted into makeshift chapels. The harbor, though still active, hosts fewer ships. Trade has slowed. Piracy and unstable borders have made sea routes treacherous. Grain shipments arrive inconsistently. Timber is scarce. Olive oil, once exported in massive amphorae, is now mostly consumed locally, if available at all. The villa estates of wealthy Romans have crumbled or been claimed by new tenants. Visigothic warlords Romanized elites hanging onto their holdings, and opportunistic traders with no allegiance to any empire. Ownership means little without enforcement, and the days of orderly land titles are gone. Some families still trace their lineage to senators, but they live modestly now, selling off jewelry or leasing land to support dwindling households. The old amphitheater stands like a fossil, a skeletal reminder of another time. Occasionally, it fills, not with gladiators or drama, but with townsfolk meeting under the eye of a local bishop or Gothic captain. These gatherings are more necessity than ceremony, to resolve disputes, to plan food distribution, to agree on who will guard the northern road from brigands. Latin is still spoken, though often mixed with Gothic, Iberian, or local dialects. Children grow up learning a blend of languages, repeating proverbs their ancestors wouldn't recognize. Within churches and monasteries, the rhythm of monastic life continues. Chants echo off old marble walls, scripture is copied laboriously onto scraped parchment, and candles flicker beside icons painted with care, but limited skill. Bishops wield the power that magistrates once held. They arbitrate conflict, negotiate with outsiders, and maintain the closest semblance of Roman bureaucracy left. Yet even they often defer to local warbands when it comes to enforcing peace. Food is simpler than it once was. Beans, coarse bread, salted fish if the weather allows. Wine is watered, but still shared at every meal. A final echo of Roman convivium. Festivals are no longer grand spectacles, but modest gatherings, celebrations that blend saints with solstices, wheat harvests with Christian martyrdoms. The roads leading out of Tarraco, once lined with mile markers and patrolled by Roman watchmen, have grown wild. Moss covers carved inscriptions. Old tombs are raided for stone. Travelers avoid journeys when they can, and those who must leave do so in groups, armed and wary. Word from the wider world is infrequent and uncertain. Messages from Gaul or Africa might take months to arrive, if they arrive at all. And yet, life. Children laugh in courtyards, women trade dyed wool for jars of honey, and fishermen patch their nets with quiet diligence. The bathhouses, where they still function, serve as meeting places and refuges from the world's disorder. Even under the weight of decline, the habits of empire persist. In Tarraco, the fall of Rome wasn't a single day. It wasn't a siege or a proclamation. It was a long unraveling, thread by thread, year by year. What remains is not Rome, but something new built atop its ruins. A hybrid world where Latin prayers echo in wooden churches, where olive trees still bloom beside forgotten roads, and where people continue, as they always have, to make what life they can from what history leaves behind.